"Mom, we are moving to my mother-in-law's house in the city, and my brother-in-law is going to live on your farm with his family. It was my wife's decision, and what she says goes." This was declared by Caleb, my only son, the boy I raised alone after becoming a widow, the man to whom I gave everything I had. He stood in front of me with his arms crossed and a coldness in his gaze that I had never known before. He was telling me that Victoria, his wife, had made the decision to move to the house of Margaret, her mother, in the city, and that Gregory, her brother, would come with his whole family to live on my farm, on my land, in the only asset I had left after years of work and sacrifice, and I, Eleanor, 62 years old, was supposed to simply accept it as if my opinion was worth nothing, as if I were an old piece of furniture that they could move from one place to another without my consent. But while he spoke with that borrowed authority, with those words that were clearly not his but Victoria's, I felt something ignite inside my chest, something that had been asleep for a long time. In that moment, I knew I was not going to stay silent. This time, I was not going to let them walk all over me, because I had a much better idea, an idea that they never imagined I would be capable of executing. But to understand how I arrived at that moment, standing in front of my son, feeling like I had become a stranger in my own house, I need to go back to the beginning. I need to tell how everything was different just a few months ago, when life on my farm flowed with that deep peace that only the country can offer. I used to wake up every morning with the rooster's crow and the aroma of fresh coffee brewing in my old kitchen. That kitchen where I had cooked thousands of meals for Caleb, where I had fed him when he was a child, where we had shared so many conversations sitting at the wooden table my late husband built with his own hands. I walked barefoot along the hallway, feeling the time-worn boards beneath my feet, warm from the morning sun, and went out to the garden where my fruit trees grew strong and my flowers perfumed the air. Everything on my farm had a rhythm, an order, a harmony that I myself had cultivated for decades. After my husband died when Caleb was barely 7 years old, I took the reins of this land and turned it into my refuge, my livelihood, my reason to keep going. Every morning I watered the plants, fed the chickens, collected the warm eggs from the coop, and in the afternoons I sat on the porch with my knitting while listening to the murmur of the wind through the tree leaves. It was a simple life, yes, but it was my life. It was mine, and no one had given it to me. I had built it with my own hands, with my sweat, with my tears, with my determination to never give up. Caleb used to visit me every weekend in those times, before Victoria completely got into his head. He would arrive on Saturday mornings, and we would spend the day together. He helped me with the farm chores, fixed what had broken during the week, checked the roof, the fence, the pipes. I would make him his favorite meal, that pot roast he had loved since he was a boy, and we would sit down to eat, talking about everything and nothing. He told me about his job in the city. I told him about the neighbors, about the harvest, about the small events of my quiet life. There was a connection between us, something that went beyond words. It was just him and me, as it had been since his father died. A team, a small but solid family. I saw in his eyes the same affection as always, the same gratitude. Although he was never very expressive with feelings, I knew he loved me, that he valued everything I had done for him, and that was enough for me. That filled my heart and made me feel that all the sacrifices had been worth it. Then he met Victoria. At first, I was genuinely happy. I was happy because my son deserved to be happy. He deserved to have a partner, someone to love him and build a life with him. She was pretty, I could not deny that, with her long hair and her way of dressing, always impeccable, always wearing makeup, always with elegant clothes that contrasted with the simplicity of my farm. When Caleb introduced her to me, I received her with open arms. I prepared a special dinner, cleaned the whole house, put fresh flowers in the living room. I wanted to make a good impression. I wanted her to feel welcome in our family. But from the moment she got out of the car and looked around, I could see something in her eyes, a flash of disdain, a grimace almost imperceptible when she saw my wooden house, my rustic garden, my chickens pecking in the yard. She smiled, yes, but it was a forced smile, one of those that does not reach the eyes. She greeted me politely, but kept her distance, as if she were afraid of getting dirty. During lunch, Victoria barely tasted the food I had prepared with so much care. She moved the green beans from one side of the plate to the other, made comments about how she was used to lighter, healthier meals according to her, as if what I cooked were poison. She constantly took out her phone to check messages, as if being at my table were a tedious obligation she had to endure. Caleb did not seem to notice any of this, or perhaps he did not want to notice. He ate with an appetite as always, and spoke animatedly, trying to include her in our conversations, but she responded with monosyllables, with short answers, looking out the window as if the landscape that seemed beautiful to me was boring to her. After lunch, I offered to show her the farm, walk through the orchard, show her the fruit trees I had planted years ago, but she declined with an excuse about her shoes not being appropriate for walking on dirt. She stayed sitting on the porch, checking her phone, while Caleb and I took the walk. I tried not to feel bad. I tried to tell myself that she simply was not used to country life, that in time she would learn to appreciate what this place had to offer. But something inside me already knew the truth. Something whispered to me that this woman was never going to love my farm nor respect me as she should. Months passed, and Caleb and Victoria got married. It was a big wedding in the city, full of people I did not know, with elegant and expensive decorations. I felt out of place in my cream-colored dress, the only elegant one I owned, among so many sophisticated people talking about things I did not understand. Trips, investments, exclusive restaurants. Margaret, Victoria's mother, was there, of course. A tall woman with dyed chestnut hair and so much jewelry on her that she looked like a walking display case. She looked me up and down when we were introduced, and her greeting was as cold as ice. "So, you are my daughter's mother-in-law, the one from the country," she said with a smile that did not hide her contempt. I just nodded, not knowing how to respond, feeling small, feeling judged. Throughout the party, Margaret was surrounded by her family, her friends, speaking loudly about her house in the city, about her comforts, about how wonderful it was to live with all the services nearby. Every now and then, she threw glances toward where I was, as if ensuring that I heard every one of her words, as if marking territory. After the wedding, Caleb's visits to my farm began to space out. He no longer came every weekend. Sometimes 2 weeks passed, 3, even a month without him appearing. When he finally arrived, he no longer came alone. Victoria accompanied him, and her presence changed the entire atmosphere of my home. She complained about the heat, the bugs, that there was no strong internet signal, that the bathroom was too old, that the beds were uncomfortable. She criticized everything, always with that sweet smile she used in front of Caleb. But when he was not looking, her eyes threw daggers at me. She would say things to me in a soft tone but with poisonous words. "Oh, Eleanor, it must be so hard living here, so alone, so far from everything. Aren't you afraid of getting old in this isolated place?" Or comments like, "I couldn't live like this without modern comforts, but I suppose you are already used to this simple life." I swallowed my rage. I bit my tongue because I did not want to create problems between her and Caleb. I did not want to be the conflicting mother-in-law everyone criticizes. So I smiled and nodded, while inside I felt how each comment was a small stab. Caleb began to change too. He stopped helping me with the farm chores. He stopped being interested in how the crops were or if I needed anything repaired. Now he arrived and sat on the porch with his phone, just like Victoria, checking work, answering emails, as if being in my house were just a formality he had to fulfill to keep up appearances. When I spoke to him, he listened halfway, answered with monosyllables, and if Victoria said something, he immediately gave her all his attention, as if her words were pure gold and mine just background noise. I tried to talk to him once. I said, "Son, I feel like we don't spend time together like before." And he replied, "It's just that I have other responsibilities now, Mom. I'm not a child anymore. I have a wife. I have to think about my future." Those words hurt me more than he could ever imagine because what I heard was, "I have to think about my future, and you are no longer part of it." Then Gregory appeared, Victoria's brother, a man of about 40 with an arrogant attitude and that way of speaking that people have when they believe the world owes them something. Caleb introduced him to me on one of those increasingly rare visits. From the first moment, Gregory began to ask questions about my farm. How many acres did it have? Did it produce anything? Had I ever thought about selling or renting it? Questions that made me deeply uncomfortable because I felt he was evaluating my property as if it were a potential business. I answered with evasions, telling him that the farm was my home, that I would never think of selling it. But he insisted. He commented on how much could be done with that land, on the potential it had, on how wasted it was in the hands of a lonely woman who was already old and could not exploit it adequately. Every word of his was a lack of respect, but he said it all with a smile, as if he were doing me a favor with his unsolicited advice. Victoria began to speak more openly about the city, about how wonderful it would be if Caleb and she lived closer to Margaret, her mother, about all the opportunities they were missing by being far away, about how Margaret's house was big and comfortable with 3 bedrooms and that there was always room for them. She told Caleb that his mother-in-law missed him, that she needed help with certain things, that it would be beautiful to be able to visit her every day instead of just occasionally. And I watched as Caleb nodded, felt how his eyes began to look elsewhere, as if my farm were suddenly a burden, an annoying commitment that tied him to a past he wanted to leave behind. Things got worse when Victoria began bringing Margaret to my farm without warning me beforehand. The two would arrive together in Caleb's car as if they owned the place, and Margaret walked through my house, looking at everything with that expression of superiority that I already found unbearable. She touched my furniture as if they were museum pieces, old and worthless. She commented on how rustic everything was, about how she could never live in a place so removed from civilization. She said all that nature gave her claustrophobia, all that silence. She said she needed the noise of the city, the movement, the stores, the restaurants, everything that, according to her, made life worth living. And Victoria nodded at every word from her mother, like an obedient student. Then both would look at me with pity, as if I were a poor old woman trapped in the past, incapable of understanding what it really was to live. I clenched my fists under the table, breathed deep, and continued serving the coffee that they barely tasted because, according to them, it was too strong, too bitter, not like the smooth coffee they drank in the city in their elegant cafes. One day, Margaret sat in my living room and began to speak directly about Caleb's future. She said her daughter deserved a better life, that Caleb had potential but was wasting it coming every so often to this place lost in the middle of nowhere, that a man of his age should be focused on growing professionally, on making contacts in the city, on building real assets, not on maintaining ties with a farm that, frankly, according to her, did not produce enough to justify the time and energy it required. Her words were like slaps, but she said them calmly, with that security that people have who are used to no one contradicting them. And the worst of all is that Caleb was sitting there next to her and said absolutely nothing. He did not defend me. He did not ask them to shut up, nor did he remind her that this farm was my home, the home where he had grown up. He simply looked at the floor like a scolded child, and I felt in that moment that I was losing him, that my son was no longer mine but theirs, Victoria's and Margaret's, that between the two of them, they had wrapped him in a web of manipulation from which he did not know how or did not want to escape. Victoria intensified her campaign. She began to make constant comments about Gregory, about how hard it was for him and his family to live in a small apartment in the city, about how his 3 children had no space to play, about how his wife complained all the time about the noise from the neighbors, the lack of fresh air. She said that Gregory had always dreamed of living in the country, of having a big place where his children could run free, where they could have animals and grow things. And every time she said this, she looked me directly in the eyes, as if she were expecting me to offer my farm as a solution, as if I should feel pity and open the doors of my home to solve the problems of a man I barely knew and who frankly generated no sympathy in me. But I did not take the bait. I did not respond to her hints. I stayed silent, drinking my tea while she kept talking and talking, painting Gregory as a martyr and me as someone selfish who had more space than she needed. Caleb stopped calling me on the phone. Before, he called me at least twice a week to ask how I was, if I needed anything, if everything was going well on the farm. But those calls disappeared. Now, if I wanted to know about him, I had to be the one to dial. And when I did, he sounded distant, rushed, always in a hurry, because he was in a meeting, or because Victoria needed something, or because they had to go out. His answers were short. "Mom, "I'm busy. I'll call you later." But that later never came, and I was left with the phone in my hand, feeling invisible, feeling like a hindrance in my own son's life. The nights became longer, lonelier. I sat on the porch looking at the stars, remembering when Caleb was little, when he ran through this same yard chasing fireflies, when he hugged me before sleeping, when he told me I was the best mom in the world. And I wondered where that child had gone, where that unconditional love I once felt was so real, so solid, had been lost. Then one day, Caleb arrived without warning. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I was in the vegetable garden picking tomatoes when I heard the car. I saw him get out with that serious expression he always wore lately, and I knew immediately that something bad was going to happen. I knew it in my gut with that mother's intuition that never fails. We went into the house, and he did not even sit down. He remained standing in the middle of the living room with his hands in his pockets, looking everywhere except at me. And then he started talking to me. He said he had been thinking a lot about his future, about what was best for him and for Victoria. He told me that the city offered more opportunities, that staying tied to visits to the farm was holding him back professionally, that Victoria felt lonely, that she missed her mother, that they needed to make a change. And I listened in silence, feeling how each word was a nail in my heart. But I still did not imagine how far he was going to go. I still thought that maybe he was just telling me that the visits would be less frequent, that maybe more time would pass without seeing him, but that in the end, we would continue being mother and son, we would continue having that bond. But then his tone changed. It became harder, firmer, as if he had rehearsed this speech many times. He told me that Victoria and he had made a decision, that they would move to Margaret's house in the city, where they would have their own space, their own life, close to everything they needed. And I nodded, swallowing the pain, thinking, well, if that is what makes them happy, I will have to accept it. Even if it hurts me, even if it means seeing him less, at least I will still have my farm, my home, my space. But then came the fatal blow. Caleb took a deep breath and looked at me for the first time since he had started speaking and said, "Mom, Gregory needs a place to live with his family, and this farm is too big for you alone. So we have decided that he will move here with his wife and his 3 children. They can take care of the property, keep it productive, and you could look for something smaller, more manageable. Maybe an apartment in town where you have services nearby, where you aren't so isolated." I froze. I could not believe what I was hearing. I felt as if they had thrown a bucket of ice water on me. I felt the air leaving my lungs, the walls of my own house closing in on me. Caleb kept talking, saying things about practicality, about common sense, about how this would be better for everyone. But I was no longer listening to his words. I only saw his mouth moving, and the only thing I could think was, how did we get here? How was my son, the boy I raised with so much love and sacrifice, standing in my living room telling me to get out of my own house, to give my space to a stranger, to a man who had done nothing for me, who had no right over this land that I had worked and cared for over decades? Finally, I found my voice and asked Caleb, "This farm is mine. It is in my name. How can you ask me something like that?" And he looked at me with that new coldness that Victoria had cultivated in him, and answered, "I know, Mom, but I thought that as a mother you would want to help. You would want to do what is best for the family." And that was when I understood everything. He had been manipulated. He had been convinced that I had the obligation to sacrifice myself once more, to give up what was mine to solve problems that were not mine. I told Caleb that I needed time to think, that I could not take a decision like that suddenly about something as important as my home. But he insisted. He told me that Gregory was already making plans, that his family needed to move soon because the lease on their apartment was about to expire, that they could not wait much time, and that it would be selfish on my part to deny them this opportunity when I had so much unused space. Selfish. That word echoed in my head like a painful echo. I, who had given my whole life for him, who had gone without nothing many times so that he would have everything. Now it turned out I was selfish for wanting to keep my own house, my own piece of land. I asked him to leave. I told him we would talk later when I could process all this. But before leaving, he threw one last stab at me. He said, "Mom, Victoria says that if you really loved me, you wouldn't hesitate for a second to help us." that a mother's love is unconditional, and that your refusal only proves that you think more about yourself than about my happiness. And he left, leaving me standing there in the middle of my living room, trembling with rage, with pain, with an incredulity so deep that I could not find words to name it. That night I could not sleep. I stayed sitting on my bed watching the shadows the moon drew on the walls, thinking about everything I had built on this farm. After my husband died, we had bought this land together with a loan that took us years to pay. We worked side by side, planting trees, putting up fences, building the house board by board. When he died of a sudden heart attack, leaving me a widow at 42 with a 7-year-old boy and a huge debt, everyone told me to sell. That it was impossible for a single woman to carry a farm forward. That I should go to the city, look for a safe job. But I refused. I clung to this land because it was the only thing I had left of him, because every tree, every stone held his memory. And also because I needed to prove to myself that I could do it. I worked from before dawn until after dusk, my hands filled with calluses, my back bent under the weight of seed sacks and tools. But I never gave up. I hired day laborers when I could pay them. I did the work myself when I couldn't. I learned about agriculture, irrigation, grafting, everything I needed to know to make this land produce. And I succeeded. I paid the debt. I maintained the farm. I made it prosperous. And meanwhile, I raised Caleb alone. I fed him, clothed him, sent him to school, paid for his supplies, his uniforms, his school trips. He never lacked anything, ever. And now he came to tell me that I was selfish for not wanting to give all that away, for not wanting to hand over my entire life to a stranger. The following days were hell. Caleb called me every day, pressuring me, asking me if I had already made a decision, if I had already thought about where I could move. He sent me messages with links to small apartments in town with prices that, according to him, were reasonable, as if money were the problem, as if he didn't understand that this wasn't about square footage or comforts, but about my identity, my history, everything I was. Victoria also began to call me with that sweet and fake voice she always used. Eleanor, honestly, I think this is best for everyone. Gregory is very hard-working. He is going to take care of the farm better than anyone, and you deserve to rest. You already worked enough in your life. It is time for you to enjoy the tranquility of a smaller place, simpler, without so many responsibilities. And I wanted to scream at her that my farm was not a responsibility but my life, that I did not want to rest in a soulless apartment while a stranger slept in the bed my husband built, while his children ran through the yard where my son had played. But I held back. I breathed deep and told her I was still thinking, that I needed more time. Then Victoria changed strategy. She stopped calling me directly and instead began sending Margaret, her mother. One afternoon, Margaret arrived at my farm in an elegant taxi. She got out with her high heels sinking into the dirt of my yard, with her designer purse hanging from her arm and that expression of superiority that already sickened me. She entered my house without me inviting her, sat in my armchair as if it were hers, and began to speak without beating around the bush. Eleanor, we need to resolve this. My daughter is suffering. Caleb is stressed. Gregory and his family are desperate, and you are being stubborn out of pure hard-headedness. This farm is too big for a woman of your age alone, without family nearby. What are you going to do when you get sick? When you need help? When you can no longer work the land? Are you going to die here alone, and no one finds out until days later? Is that what you want? I replied that I was perfectly fine, that I had neighbors, that I could take care of myself, and that this was my house, my legal property, and that no one was going to get me out of here. But Margaret let out a dry laugh and told me, "Oh, Eleanor, so naive. Legal, yes. But Caleb is your only son, your only heir. Eventually, all this will be his anyway. So why not make things easier now? Why not make your son happy instead of being a burden to him?" Her words hit me like fists. Each one was a calculated poison designed to make me feel useless, old, in the way. I stood up, trembling with rage, and asked her to leave my house, that she had no right to come and insult me in my own home. But she stood up calmly, smoothed her skirt, looked me up and down and said, "Think about it well, Eleanor. Think about what is best for Caleb. Because if you force him to choose between you and his wife, between the past and his future, We already know who is going to win." And she left, leaving a trail of expensive perfume and poison in the air. I let myself fall into the armchair, and for the first time in many years, I cried. I cried from helplessness, from rage, from fear. Because her words, although cruel, had some truth. Caleb had already chosen, maybe months ago, maybe since the day he met Victoria. And I had been too blind or too optimistic to see it. That same night, Caleb appeared again at my farm. But this time he did not come alone. He brought Victoria and Gregory. The three entered my house and sat in the living room, as if this were a business meeting. Gregory had a folder in his hands and put it on the table with a smile that tried to appear friendly, but only gave me chills. "Eleanor, I brought some papers for you to review. They are very simple. Basically, you would give me permission to live here with my family, and in exchange, I would take charge of all maintenance expenses, repairs, everything the farm needs. You wouldn't have to worry about anything, and you could live peacefully in another place, knowing your property is in good hands." I looked at him incredulously and asked, "And what happens with my rights? With my property? With my name on the deeds?" He exchanged a look with Victoria and then said, "Well, eventually we could do a legal transfer, something that benefits everyone. It is just a formality, but we can talk about that later. The important thing now is to resolve the housing situation." I felt my blood boil. I realized in that moment what was really happening. This was not a favor. This was not family help. This was a plan elaborated to take my farm from me step by step. First convince me to leave, then put Gregory and his family in. Then make papers that eventually would strip me of my property legally. And all wrapped in a speech of family love, of what was best for everyone. I looked Caleb in the eyes and asked him, "Did you know about this? Do you agree with this plan?" And he could not hold my gaze. He looked down and said, "Mom, it's the best for everyone. We have to think about the future, about the family." And that was when Victoria intervened with that soft but firm voice she used to manipulate him. "Eleanor, if you really love Caleb, if you really care about his happiness, you would do this without hesitation. A mother's love means sacrifice. It means putting your son first, always. And right now, he needs you to do this for him. He needs you to be generous, to think big, to understand that this is an opportunity for the whole family." I stood looking at the three of them, sitting in my own living room, in the house I built with my own hands, surrounded by people who were supposed to be my family, but who in that moment felt like strangers, like invaders, like enemies. And then Caleb said the words that destroyed the last thing that remained of our relationship. "Mom, we are moving to my mother-in-law's house in the city, and my brother-in-law is going to live on your farm with his family. It was my wife's decision, and what she says goes." I remained silent because there was nothing left to say, because I understood that I had lost my son, not to death, but to something worse, to manipulation, to greed, to betrayal. But while they kept talking, while Gregory took more papers out of his folder, and Victoria smiled with that smile of victory, I felt something wake up inside me, something that had been asleep during all these months of abuse. Something strong, something fierce. And I knew that this was not going to end as they planned. Because I had a much better idea. I told them I needed a few days to think it over properly, that such an important decision could not be taken lightly. Gregory put away his papers with a satisfied smile, clearly convinced he had already won. Victoria nodded with that condescending expression, as if she were doing me a favor by giving me time to accept the inevitable. And Caleb simply looked relieved, as if the fact that I hadn't exploded in screams meant that eventually I would yield. The three left that night, sure that in a few days I would be signing papers, packing my things, and handing them my life on a silver platter. But what they didn't know is that I had already made my decision, and it wasn't the one they expected. As soon as they left, I locked the door, turned off the lights, and sat in the darkness of my living room, letting the rage and pain turn into something colder, more calculated, more powerful. Determination. The next morning, I got up early, bathed, put on my best clothes, and drove to town, directly to the office of Attorney Arthur, a man of about 50 who had helped several people in the area with land and inheritance matters. I knew him by sight because his mother had been a friend of mine years ago. When I entered his office, He received me with kindness, offered me coffee, and asked me to tell him what I needed. I took a deep breath and told him everything from the beginning. I spoke about how Caleb had changed since he married Victoria, about the constant pressures, the manipulation, the appearance of Gregory and his plans to keep my farm, about the papers they wanted me to sign, about everything. While I spoke, Arthur took notes, and his expression became increasingly serious. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and said to me, "Eleanor, what you are describing to me is an attempt at dispossession disguised as family help, and if you had signed those papers Gregory showed you, you probably would have lost your property in less than a year." His words confirmed my worst suspicions. I asked him what I could do, how I could protect myself, and he began to explain to me. "First," he said, "we need to make sure that no one can make any legal movement with your property without your express consent. We are going to put alerts on the property registry. Any attempt to register a document related to your farm will be notified to you immediately. Second, I need you to authorize me to investigate Gregory, his financial situation, his background, because if he is so desperate to get a place to live for free, there may be hidden reasons. And third, you need to document everything, every conversation, every pressure, every attempt at manipulation. Because if this escalates, and we need to take stronger legal measures, we are going to need evidence." I agreed to everything, feeling for the first time in weeks that I was not alone, that there was someone on my side, someone who understood the gravity of what was happening. Arthur gave me his personal number, told me to call him at any moment if I felt pressure or threat, and promised me that in a week he would have information about Gregory. I returned to my farm feeling different, stronger, clearer about what I had to do. The following days were difficult. Caleb called every day asking if I had already made my decision, and I told him I was still thinking, that I needed more time. His tone became increasingly impatient, more annoyed, as if I were being irrationally difficult. Victoria also called, with messages that sounded sweet but carried veiled threats. "Eleanor, I hope you understand that Caleb is very stressed with all this. His health could be affected if this drags on too long. You wouldn't want your son to get sick because of your stubbornness, right?" And I responded calmly, with a serenity that surprised them, telling them that I understood their concern, but that this was a very important decision, and I needed to be sure of doing the right thing. A week later, Arthur called me and asked me to go to his office. When I arrived, he had a folder on his desk, and his expression was grave. "Eleanor, I investigated Gregory as you asked me, and I found worrying things." He opened the folder and began to show me documents. "Gregory has significant debts. He owes more than $30,000 between credit cards, personal loans, and late payments on his apartment. He has pending lawsuits from creditors, and 6 months ago he tried to file for bankruptcy but did not meet the requirements. Furthermore, I discovered that 2 years ago he was involved in minor real estate fraud. He tried to sell a property that wasn't his, using forged documents. He didn't go to prison because he reached a settlement, but it remained on his record." I felt my blood freeze. This was the man they wanted to put on my farm, the man to whom Caleb and Victoria wanted to give total access to my property. A scammer, a debtor, someone who was clearly desperate for money. I asked Arthur what all this meant, and he was direct. "Eleanor, if Gregory moves onto your farm with your permission, even if it is verbal, it could be very difficult to get him out later. Squatters' rights and tenancy laws are complicated. He could stay months or years litigating, and in the meantime, he would have access to your property. He could damage it, use it as collateral for more loans, or even attempt some type of fraud using his residence there as proof of rights. Furthermore, with his debts, his creditors could eventually put liens on any property where he resides, which could complicate your legal situation enormously. This is not just a family problem, Eleanor. This is a real danger to your assets." I asked for copies of all the documents, the debts, the records, everything, and he gave them to me. Furthermore, he handed me a legal letter addressed to Caleb, Victoria, and Gregory, notifying them formally that any occupation of my property without my written consent would be considered trespassing and would be treated legally as appropriate. That night, I sat on my porch with all those documents in my hands and felt a mixture of sadness and clarity. Sadness because all this confirmed that my son had been manipulated to participate in something that could have destroyed me. And clarity because now I had the tools to defend myself, to protect what was mine. I decided it was time to confront them. But not all three together, but one by one. Starting with Caleb, because he was my son. And although he had betrayed me, although he had chosen Victoria over me, there was still a part of me that wanted to give him a chance to wake up, to see the truth, to choose correctly. I called him and asked him to come alone, without Victoria, without Gregory, that I needed to talk to him, from mother to son. He hesitated, but finally accepted. He said he would come the next day in the afternoon. When Caleb arrived, I already had everything prepared. The documents on the table, coffee served, and my heart armored against any manipulation. He entered with that expression of annoyance, as if this meeting were a waste of time. He sat down, and before he could say anything, I pushed the papers toward him. "Read this," I told him. He took them reluctantly, began to read, and I saw how his expression changed from annoyance to confusion to concern. He read about Gregory's debts, about the fraud, about the lawsuits, about the creditors, and with every page he turned, his face grew paler. When he finished, he looked up at me and stuttered, "Mom, I didn't know anything about this. Victoria never told me Gregory had problems. Gregory never mentioned any of this." I held his gaze and said, "Caleb, this is the man you wanted to give my farm to? The man you were going to hand over the property that your father and I built with our own hands? A scammer? A debtor? Someone who probably saw in me an easy opportunity, an old and lonely widow he could manipulate using his brother-in-law? And I wanted to ask you, son, how did we get here? How did we go from being a team, you and me against the world, to this? To you being on the side of people who clearly want to harm me?" He tried to answer, but I continued. "For months you have pressured me. You have made me feel guilty. You have told me that I am selfish, that I don't love you enough because I don't want to give away my house. You have allowed your wife and your mother-in-law to come to insult me in my own living room. You have brought a stranger with legal papers to strip me of what is mine. And all this time, did you never ask yourself if something was wrong? Did you never investigate? Did you never doubt what Victoria told you?" Caleb had tears in his eyes. He tried to take my hand, but I pulled it away. He said, "Mom, I'm sorry. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought Gregory really needed help. Victoria told me that you had more than you needed, that it would be an act of generosity, of family. I didn't know there were ulterior motives. I'm so sorry." And I replied, "Caleb, the problem isn't just that you didn't know. The problem is that you never cared to find out. You trusted the word of your wife, whom you've barely known for 3 years, more than your mother, who raised you alone, who sacrificed everything for you. You let them treat me like garbage, let them humiliate me, let them pressure me, and never once did you take my side. You never defended me. You never said, 'Enough with my mother.' And that, my son, is what really hurts me. Not Gregory's plan, but your betrayal, your abandonment, your forgetting of everything we were." He was weeping openly now. He said he was sorry again and again, that he had been a fool, that Victoria had convinced him that I was being difficult, that this was normal, that families helped each other like this. But I had no more tears. I had already cried enough. I told him, "Caleb, I am going to give you a chance, just one, to choose correctly. You are going to go back to your house. You are going to talk to Victoria, and you are going to tell her that Gregory's plan is canceled, that you discovered the truth about his debts and his background, that my farm is not available to anyone, and if she has a problem with that, if she pressures you, if she manipulates you, if she threatens to leave you, then you will know exactly what kind of woman and what kind of marriage you have. But if you choose to stay silent, if you choose to play her game, if you choose her side over mine, then I want you to know that you will have lost me forever, because I am not going to continue being the emotional doormat of this family." Caleb sat in silence, processing my words. The tears kept running down his face, but I no longer felt pity. I felt only a deep tiredness, an exhaustion of years of giving without receiving, of loving without being valued. Finally, he stood up, took the documents I had shown him, and said, "Mom, I'm going to fix this. I promise you, I'm going to talk to Victoria. I'm going to tell her the truth about Gregory, and we are going to end this plan. I am not going to lose you." I looked him in the eyes, searching for sincerity, searching for the son I once knew, and I saw something there. Maybe regret, maybe shame, maybe a flash of the boy he had been before Victoria wrapped him in her web of manipulation. I said, "Okay, Caleb, I'm going to give you that chance, but I want you to understand something. If you come back here with more pressures, with more plans, with more attempts to take away what is mine, I am going to take legal measures. I am going to use everything I have to protect myself, and that includes cutting you completely out of my life and any future inheritance. Because I am not going to reward betrayal with rewards." He nodded, gave me a hug that I barely returned, and left. The next 3 days were of absolute silence. Caleb didn't call. Victoria didn't call. No one appeared at my farm, and I used that time to strengthen my defenses. I went to Arthur and updated my will, making it very clear that as long as I lived, no one had rights over my property, and that if something happened to me, the farm would be sold and the money donated to a charity before falling into the hands of people who had betrayed me. Arthur also helped me install security cameras around the property. He told me it was important to have a visual record of any attempt at invasion or physical pressure. Additionally, I spoke with my neighbors. I told them what was happening. Not all the details, but enough so they knew that if they saw strangers prowling around my farm or if I disappeared suddenly, they should call the police and Arthur. They promised to be attentive. They offered their support, and for the first time in months, I felt part of a community, of a network that protected me. On the 4th day, Caleb appeared again. But this time his face was haggard. He had deep, dark circles and an expression of defeat that alarmed me. He entered the house and let himself fall onto the sofa as if he had no strength to remain standing. "I talked to Victoria," he said with a hoarse voice. "I showed her the documents. I told her everything we discovered about Gregory. I explained that the plan was cancelled, that your farm was not available, and I expected her to understand that she would have been deceived too. But it wasn't like that, Mom. She knew everything. She knew from the beginning." I looked at him, unable to believe it. "What do you mean she knew everything?" I asked. He looked up with red eyes. "She knew about Gregory's debts. She knew about the fraud. She knew he was desperate for a place to live rent-free. She knew everything. And still, she convinced me that this was the right thing. She told me you had too much, that you were selfish, that as a mother you should help. But when I confronted her with the proof, she didn't even deny it. She just said that family helps each other regardless of the past, that Gregory's mistakes shouldn't condemn him to live in misery, and that I was being weak for letting you manipulate me." I felt my blood boil. So Victoria was not only manipulating Caleb, but she was consciously trying to strip me of my property, using her brother's debts and problems as an excuse. I asked Caleb, "And what did you do? What did you tell her when you discovered she had lied to you?" He covered his face with his hands. "I told her this wasn't right, that I couldn't ask you to sacrifice your home for Gregory's mistakes, that you were my mother and deserved respect." And then she exploded. She told me I had to choose between her and you, that if I chose you, it would prove I had never matured, that I was still a mama's boy, that our marriage had no future if I didn't set boundaries with you. She gave me an ultimatum. Mom, her or you? The silence that followed was heavy. I watched my son, waiting for him to tell me he had chosen correctly, that he had defended what was fair, that he had set limits on a woman who was clearly using him. But by his defeated expression, by the way he avoided my gaze, I knew the conversation had not ended well. I asked him directly, "Caleb, what did you choose?" And he stuttered. I told her I needed time to think, that I couldn't make a decision like that I loved you both, and that there had to be a way to resolve this without anyone getting hurt. And I felt a mixture of disappointment and something akin to pity, because my son, even after discovering the truth, even after seeing the manipulation and the lies, still did not have the courage to do the right thing. I told him, "Caleb, the fact that you need time to decide between supporting your mother who raised you alone, who never lied to you, who always loved you unconditionally, and supporting a woman who has lied to you, who has conspired to rob your own mother, who has manipulated you for years, that already tells me everything I need to know about where your priorities are. He tried to protest. Mom, it's not that simple. I love her. We are married. I have a commitment to her. I can't just give up on my marriage because of this. And I replied, I am not asking you to end your marriage. I am asking you to do the right thing, to defend justice, to protect your mother from people who want to harm her. But if for you that means choosing, then yes, my son, choose. Because I am no longer going to keep waiting for crumbs of your loyalty. Caleb stayed a while longer trying to explain, trying to justify his indecision, telling me that Victoria was under a lot of pressure from her family, that Margaret was also pressuring her to help Gregory, that it was complicated. But I was no longer listening to his excuses. Finally, he left, promising he would return when he had a definitive answer. And I closed the door behind him, knowing in my heart that probably that answer would not be the one I expected. That night I called Arthur and told him what had happened. He told me to prepare for the worst, to document that conversation with Caleb, and to be ready to take legal measures if necessary. He also suggested I consider obtaining a preventive restraining order against Gregory based on his background and the implicit threats to occupy my property. 2 days later, I received a call from an unknown number. When I answered, it was Margaret. Her voice sounded cold and calculated. Eleanor, I think it is time that you and I talk like adults, without the kids in the middle. My daughter told me what you discovered about Gregory, and I understand your concern, but I think you are exaggerating things. Gregory made mistakes in the past, yes, but he has changed. He is a good father, a good husband, and he deserves a chance to get ahead. Your farm would be perfect for him, and frankly, I don't understand why you cling so much to a place that is clearly too big for you. I responded with all the calm I could muster. Margaret, my farm is not up for discussion. I am not interested in Gregory's history nor his needs. What interests me is protecting what is mine, and I am not going to allow your family to use my son to manipulate me. She let out a dry laugh. Oh, Eleanor, so dramatic. Look, I'm going to be honest with you. Caleb is weak. He always has been. My daughter has him completely under control. He is going to do what she says eventually. And if that means moving away from you permanently, he will do it. So it suits you to cooperate. Because if you continue with this attitude, you are going to lose your son forever, and you are going to be left alone on that farm waiting for visits that will never arrive until you die and no one finds out for days. Is that what you want? Her words were cruel, designed to hurt me deeply, to break me. But it didn't work anymore. I told her, Margaret, I prefer to die alone with my dignity intact than to live knowing that I let myself be trampled by people like you and your family. So I am going to tell you this just once. Stay away from me. All of you stay away from my property, or I am going to take legal measures that you are not going to like. And I hung up. My hands were trembling with rage, but also with something else, with power, with certainty that I was doing the right thing. That same afternoon, Arthur called me to tell me he had prepared all the necessary legal documents, restraining orders, formal notifications, and a preventive lawsuit in case they tried to occupy my property. He also informed me that he had contacted a local journalist who was interested in doing a story about attempts at dispossession of elderly people by family members. He asked me if I would be willing to tell my story publicly if things escalated, and I told him yes, that I had nothing to hide, and that maybe my story could help other people in similar situations to defend themselves, not to let themselves be manipulated by guilt or fear. The next morning, I found something that froze my blood. When I went out to the yard to feed the chickens, I noticed that the lock on the main gate was forced. Someone had tried to open it during the night. The marks were recent, scratches on the metal shining under the sunlight. Immediately I checked the cameras Arthur had helped me install, and there was the evidence. Around 2 a.m, a car had parked in front of my property, and 2 figures had gotten out. One of them was clearly Gregory. I recognized him by his height and his way of walking. The other person was harder to identify, but seemed to be a younger man, maybe a friend or an accomplice. In the video, they were seen trying to open the gate, testing different tools, until apparently they realized the cameras were there and fled quickly. I saved the video immediately, backed it up in 3 different places, and called Arthur. He arrived in less than an hour, accompanied by a police officer. They reviewed the cameras, took photos of the damaged lock, and filed an official report. The officer told me that this constituted attempted trespassing, and that with the video evidence, they could proceed legally against Gregory. Arthur added that this strengthened our case enormously, that it demonstrated Gregory's real intentions, and that now we had solid grounds to obtain an immediate restraining order. The officer asked me if I wanted to press formal charges, and I, without hesitating a second, said yes, that I wanted this on record, that I wanted legal protection against these people who clearly respected neither limits nor laws. He handed me a case number, told me he would be alert to any other suspicious activity around my property, and left, leaving me with a mixture of fear and determination. I called Caleb immediately. When he answered, I told him without preamble, "Your brother-in-law tried to break into my property last night by force. I have everything on video, and I just pressed formal charges with the police." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and then he said with a trembling voice, "What are you saying? That can't be true. Gregory wouldn't do something like that." I replied, "Caleb, I have the video. Do you want me to send it to you? Do you want to see with your own eyes how your wife's brother tried to violate my property at 2 in the morning? He didn't know what to say. He stuttered something about there needing to be an explanation, that maybe Gregory just wanted to talk to me, and I exploded. "Talk at 2 in the morning forcing locks? Wake up, Caleb. Wake up once and for all, and look at reality. This man is a criminal. Your wife knew it, and still she convinced you to put him in my house." Caleb hung up without saying anything else, and I stayed there with the phone in my hand, feeling a mixture of victory and sadness. Victory because finally I had irrefutable proof of what I was facing, and sadness because every step I took to protect myself pushed me further away from my son. But there was no turning back. I could no longer continue being the understanding mother, the one who forgave everything, the one who sacrificed eternally. Now I had to be the woman who defended herself, the one who set boundaries, the one who said enough, even if that meant losing the only family I had left. That afternoon, Arthur returned with the restraining orders signed by a judge. Gregory could not come within 500 yards of my property under penalty of immediate arrest. Furthermore, we had a similar order ready for Margaret and for Victoria in case they tried something similar. 2 hours later, Caleb appeared at my farm, but this time he didn't come alone. He brought Victoria, and by the expression on both of them, I knew this conversation was not going to be friendly. They didn't even get out of the car. They honked the horn demanding I come out. When I went out to the porch, Victoria rolled down the window and screamed at me from the car. "How dare you press charges against my brother? How dare you involve him with the police over a misunderstanding? He just wanted to talk to you. He just wanted to explain his situation to you, and you treat him like a criminal. You are a cruel woman, Eleanor. Cruel and selfish. My family has only tried to help you, to offer you solutions, and you pay us with betrayal." I kept my calm, although inside I was furious. I replied, "Victoria, your brother tried to enter my property by force at 2 in the morning. I have videos. If you want to see them, I'll gladly show you. And if that is your idea of help, then I want nothing from your family. Stay away from me. Stay away from my property, or the legal consequences are going to be worse." Caleb finally spoke from the driver's seat. "Mom, please. This is getting out of control. We are family. We have to be able to resolve this without lawyers, without police, without all this drama." I replied, "Caleb, the drama was created by you all. I am only defending myself. And if you can't see that, if you can't see that your wife and her family are trying to rob me, then really there is nothing more to talk about between us." Victoria let out a bitter laugh and said, "You know what, Eleanor? Keep your farm. Keep your land. Stay alone in this forgotten place, because that is exactly what you are going to be. Alone. Caleb is not coming anymore. He's not going to call you anymore. He's not going to worry about you, because I am going to make sure he understands that you chose your property over your own son. And when you are old and sick and need help, there will be no one who cares about you." Her words were pure poison, designed to hurt me as deeply as possible. But I had already cried enough. I had already suffered enough. I held her gaze and said, I prefer to be alone with my dignity than surrounded by vipers like you, Victoria. And if Caleb chooses to stay with you after everything you have done, after the lies, after the attempted robbery, after everything, then I failed as a mother because I didn't teach him to recognize evil when he has it right next to him. I looked Caleb directly in the eyes and added, "Son, if you leave now, if you choose to go with her without saying anything, without defending what is right, then consider this the last time you see me, because I am not going to keep waiting for you to remember who I am, to value what I did for you. I deserve more than this, and if you can't give it to me, then I prefer to have nothing." The silence that followed was deafening. Caleb looked at me with tears in his eyes, with his mouth half open as if he wanted to say something, but the words didn't come out. Victoria pulled on his arm. "Let's go, Caleb. This woman is crazy. It's not worth wasting more time on her." And I watched as my son, that boy I had raised, that man I had loved unconditionally, started the car and drove off, kicking up dust on the road without saying a word, without defending anything, without choosing me. I stood there watching the car disappear into the distance, and I felt something break inside me. Something that had been cracked for months but finally shattered completely. It was the last thread connecting me to the hope that things could go back to how they were before. I entered my house, closed the door, and for the first time since all this began, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't collapse. I simply sat in my armchair in the silence of my home and felt a strange peace. It was the peace of having done the right thing, even if it hurt. It was the peace of having set limits, even if they cost dearly. It was the peace of knowing that my dignity remained intact, that my farm was still mine, that no one had broken me. That night I slept better than in months, because at last I had stopped fighting against myself. At last I had accepted that defending what was mine did not make me a bad mother. It made me a strong woman, a woman who knew her worth, a woman who didn't let herself be trampled by anyone, not even by her own son. When love turns into abuse, when family turns into poison, the only healthy option is to walk away. The following days were quiet. No one called. No one appeared. It was as if they had finally understood that I was serious. Arthur kept me informed. He told me that Gregory had been officially notified of the charges and the restraining order, and that, according to his sources, Gregory and his family had moved to another city, probably fleeing their creditors. He also informed me that word had spread in town about what had happened, and that several elderly people facing similar situations with abusive family members had approached him seeking legal advice. My story, without my intending it, had become an example, a light for others who suffered in silence, thinking they had to endure it because it was family. One afternoon, I was watering my plants when I saw a car approaching up the road. My heart raced, thinking maybe it was Caleb, that he had come to his senses, that he was coming to apologize. But when the car stopped, I saw it was a young woman, about 30 years old, someone I didn't recognize. She stepped out shyly and approached. "Excuse me, are you Eleanor?" she asked. I nodded, and she continued. "My name is Chloe. I'm a journalist for the local paper. Attorney Arthur told me about your case, and I was wondering if you would be willing to speak with me about what you lived through. I think your story could help many people." I looked at her for a moment, evaluating if I really wanted to make my story public, if I wanted everyone to know what my own son had tried to do to me. But then I thought of all those elderly people Arthur had mentioned, all those mothers and fathers who were probably suffering in silence, being manipulated by their own children, convinced they had to sacrifice everything because that was family love. And I knew I had to speak, that my pain could serve something bigger than me. I told Chloe to come in. I offered her coffee, and we sat on the porch where so many times I had sat alone to cry, to think, to gather strength. She took out a recorder with my permission and began to ask me questions. "Tell me from the beginning. How did all this start?" And I told her everything, without hiding anything. I spoke about how Caleb had changed after marrying Victoria, about the constant manipulation, about Gregory's visits, about the papers they wanted me to sign, about Margaret's pressures, about the attempted break-in, about everything. As I spoke, I felt as if I were releasing a huge weight that I had been carrying on my shoulders for months. Chloe took notes constantly, and in her eyes, I saw something that surprised me: genuine empathy. When I finished my story, she turned off the recorder and said to me, "Eleanor, you have no idea how many stories like yours I have heard in the last few years. The dispossession of elderly people by their own relatives is more common than people imagine. But the majority don't dare to report it because they feel shame, because they are afraid of being left alone, because society has taught them that parents must sacrifice everything, always, without limits, without conditions. You did something very brave by defending yourself, by setting limits, by saying enough." I asked her when the article would be published, and she told me in 2 days that it would be an extensive piece with all the details, and that it would include comments from Arthur on the legal aspects and from a psychologist on family manipulation. She also asked for my permission to use my real name, and I, after thinking about it a moment, told her yes, that I had nothing to hide, that my story was real and deserved to be told with first and last names. The article was published on a Sunday on the front page of the local paper. The headline read, "Eleanor, the 62-year-old woman who faced her own family to save her heritage." And below there was a photo of me standing in front of my farm with a serious but dignified expression. The article was detailed. It told my whole story, from my widowhood to the attempted dispossession. It included fragments of my statements, legal explanations from Arthur about how these family frauds work, and alarming data about how many elderly people lose their properties every year due to manipulation by relatives. It also included the video of Gregory's attempted break-in, although with his face pixelated for legal reasons. The impact was immediate. My phone started ringing early. Neighbors, friends, acquaintances from town, everyone called to express their support, to tell me I had done the right thing, to tell me their own stories of family abuse they had never dared to report. But not all reactions were positive. I also received anonymous calls insulting me, telling me I was a bad mother, that I had exposed my son publicly, that I was vindictive, resentful. Someone even told me I deserved to die alone for having betrayed my family. At first, those words hurt me. They made me doubt. But then I remembered the video of Gregory trying to force my gate. I remembered Victoria's lies. I remembered Caleb's coldness. And I knew I had done the right thing, that exposing the truth was not betrayal, but justice. 3 days after the article, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, an older woman's voice on the other side said shyly, "Eleanor, you don't know me, but I read your story in the newspaper, and I needed to call you to thank you. I am going through something similar with my daughter and her husband. They want me to sign my house over to them. They say it is for my own good, that I am already too old to live alone. But after reading your story, I understood that what I feel is not wrong, that I have the right to defend myself. I called the lawyer mentioned in the article, and I am going to protect what is mine. Thank you for being brave. Thank you for speaking." That call was the first of many. During the following weeks, I received dozens of calls, letters, and even visits from older people who were facing similar situations. Some just wanted to talk, to vent, to feel listened to. Others asked for advice on lawyers, on how to document the abuse, on how to set limits without feeling guilty. Arthur told me his office had received a significant increase in consultations related to family dispossession, and that several cases had managed to be resolved thanks to the victims now knowing they could defend themselves, that they were not alone. My story, without my planning it, had turned into a small but powerful movement of older people recovering their voice, their dignity, their right to say no. Caleb didn't call. He didn't appear. He gave no signs of life for weeks. I tried not to think about him. I tried to focus on my farm, on the people who now sought me asking for help, on rebuilding my peace. But the nights were difficult. In the darkness of my room, the memories arrived inevitably. I remembered Caleb as a child running through the yard. I remembered his hugs, his laughter, the times he told me, "I love you, Mom." And I wondered where that child had been lost. At what moment had love turned into manipulation? At what moment had I stopped being his mother to become an obstacle in his path? But then I reminded myself that the Caleb I loved maybe never really existed. Or maybe he did exist, but died the day he chose greed over loyalty, comfort over justice, his wife over his mother. 1 month after the article, I was at the town market buying vegetables when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Mom?" I turned around, and there was Caleb, alone, without Victoria, without Margaret, without Gregory. He looked terrible. He had lost weight, had deep dark circles under his eyes, and an expression of absolute defeat on his face. We stood looking at each other in silence for what seemed like an eternity. And then he said with a broken voice, "Can we talk, please?" I looked at him, evaluating if I had the energy for another confrontation, if I had space in my heart for more pain. But something in his eyes moved me. We went to a small coffee shop, sat at a table in the back, and I waited for him to speak first. Caleb began slowly. "Mom, I read the article. I read it 10 times. And each time I felt worse. I saw the video of Gregory's attempted break-in. I saw all the evidence you presented. And I realized how blind I had been, how manipulated I was. Victoria lied to me about everything. She knew exactly who her brother was. She knew about his debts, his background, and still, she convinced me that you were the problem, that you were selfish, when in reality, the selfish ones were us." He paused, and tears began to fall down his face. After the article was published, everyone started talking to me. At work, in the street, acquaintances who stopped me to tell me I was a bad son, asking how I could do that to my mother. People looked at me with contempt, and I tried to defend myself. I tried to explain, but there was no possible explanation because it was all true. He continued talking. He told me he had confronted Victoria again after the article, that he had demanded the complete truth, and that she finally had admitted that everything had been a plan from the beginning, that she and her mother had seen in me an opportunity to solve Gregory's problems, that she never really loved him, that she only married him because I had a mother with property, with land, with something they could exploit. When he told her he wanted a divorce, she didn't even fight. She just laughed and told him he had been a fool, easy to manipulate, that there were other men with more to offer, and that she had done him a favor by showing him who she really was. Caleb looked at me with pleading eyes. "Mom, I ruined everything. I lost my marriage. I lost my dignity. I lost the respect of people. But the worst is that I lost you, and I don't know if someday you will be able to forgive me. I don't expect you to take me back. I don't expect you to act as if nothing happened. I just needed you to know that I am sorry, that I understand what I did, that I am going to live with this guilt for the rest of my life." I listened to him in silence, processing every word, searching in my heart if there was any forgiveness left, if there was space to rebuild what had been broken. Finally, I spoke. "Caleb, what you did to me has no excuse. You betrayed me. You humiliated me. You tried to rob me of the only thing I have. You let your wife and her family treat me like garbage, and you stayed silent watching. But what hurts me most is not that. What hurts me most is that you had multiple opportunities to do the right thing. I showed you the proof about Gregory. I explained to you what was happening. I gave you the chance to choose well, and still, you doubted. Still, you needed the whole world to point at you to finally open your eyes." He nodded, crying, "Mom, I know, and I have no forgiveness. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want you to know that I am going to spend the rest of my life trying to be better, trying to recover even a little bit of your respect." I told Caleb that forgiveness was not something that could be given from one day to the next, that I needed time, that I needed to see actions, not just words, because words had been carried away by the wind too many times. He nodded, understanding. He told me he had started therapy, that he was working on understanding how he had allowed himself to be manipulated so easily, how he had lost his moral compass along the way. He told me he had resigned from his job in the city, that he was looking for something closer to town, not to pressure me, nor to invade my space, but because he wanted to be available in case one day I decided I could trust him again. I told him I appreciated his honesty, but that things between us would never go back to being as before, that something had broken permanently, and that although maybe with time we could rebuild some type of relationship, it would never be the same blind trust, the same unconditional surrender that I had had before. He accepted my terms with humility, something I had never seen in him since he married Victoria, and we said goodbye without hugs, without promises, only with a silent understanding that the path forward would be long and painful. The weeks passed, and Caleb kept his word. He didn't pressure me. He didn't appear at my farm without warning. But every Sunday, he sent me a simple message. "Mom, I hope you are well. If one day you want to talk, I am here." I didn't always respond, but when I did, it was brief, cordial, but distant. Meanwhile, my life began to rebuild itself in ways I never imagined. The article had generated so much interest that a national organization for the protection of elderly people contacted me to ask me to be a spokesperson for a campaign on family dispossession. I accepted and began to travel to nearby towns giving talks, telling my story, helping other people recognize the signs of manipulation and abuse. For the first time in years, I felt useful, not just as a mother or as the owner of a farm, but as someone whose experience could generate real change in the lives of others. I met dozens of people with stories similar to mine. Amelia, a 70-year-old woman whose son had forged her signature to sell her house. Marlene, who had been locked by her own daughter in a nursing home against her will to take over her pension. Eloise, not Margaret, but another Eloise, an 80-year-old woman whose grandchildren had abandoned her in a public hospital after emptying her bank account. Each story was a reminder that my experience was not unique, that there was a silent epidemic of abuse towards older people hidden behind the closed doors of apparently normal families. And every time I helped someone find a lawyer, to report, to recover their dignity, I felt that my pain had served for something bigger, that my suffering had not been in vain. My farm became a refuge, not just for me, but for some of the women I met in the talks. Several came to visit me seeking advice, seeking a safe space to talk without being judged. We organized small gatherings on my porch where we shared our stories, our fears, our victories. We became a community, a support network that none of us had had before. And for the first time since my husband's death, I didn't feel alone. I felt accompanied, surrounded by strong women, survivors, warriors who refused to be victims, who had decided to fight for what was theirs with dignity and courage. I installed a small community garden on part of my land where several of these women came to work the earth, to grow vegetables, to reconnect with something pure and simple that no one could take from us. Contact with nature, the fruit of our own effort, the satisfaction of creating something with our own hands. 6 months after the article, I received a call from Arthur. He had important news. "Eleanor, I need you to come to my office. There are developments on Gregory's case." I went immediately, my heart racing. When I arrived, Arthur had a smile on his face. "Gregory was arrested," he told me. "Turns out that after fleeing from here, he tried to do the same thing in another city. He convinced a 90-year-old woman to sign a power of attorney over her house, but this time the lady's niece was a lawyer and discovered him before he could complete the fraud. Now he faces multiple charges of fraud, attempted dispossession, and forgery of documents. He will probably spend several years in prison. Furthermore, Margaret and Victoria are being investigated as accomplices. Apparently, they participated in several of Gregory's frauds." I felt a deep satisfaction. It wasn't revenge, it was justice. It was the confirmation that I had done the right thing by reporting, by defending myself, by not staying silent. I asked Arthur if he knew anything about Caleb, and he told me that according to his sources, Caleb had cooperated completely with the authorities, providing information about the activities of Victoria and her family, that his divorce was almost finalized, and that apparently he was rebuilding his life little by little. That night, Caleb called me for the first time in months. "Mom, I found out about Gregory. I wanted you to know that I testified against him. I told the police everything I knew about his plans, about how Victoria and he had planned everything. I know it doesn't make up for what I did to you, but it was the least I could do." I thanked him for his honesty and told him I appreciated that he had finally done the right thing. I felt that maybe, just maybe, there was hope that someday we could have some kind of relationship, although it would never be like before. A year after everything started, I was sitting on my porch on a quiet afternoon, drinking coffee and looking at my land. That land I almost lost, that land for which I had fought tooth and nail. I thought about everything that had happened, everything I had learned. I had learned that love cannot be unconditional when it turns into abuse, That setting limits did not make me a bad mother. It made me a woman with dignity. That defending what was mine was not selfishness. It was survival. I had learned that family is not always sacred. That sometimes the people who are supposed to love you are the ones who hurt you the most. And that it is okay to walk away from them. It is okay to close doors. It is okay to say enough. I had also learned that it is never too late to defend yourself. That age is not weakness. That older people deserve respect, not pity. They deserve protection, not exploitation. They deserve dignity, not manipulation. Caleb had started visiting me once a month. No more, no less. It was an arrangement I had established, and he respected it. We were slowly rebuilding something. It wasn't the mother-son relationship we once had, but it was honest. It was real. It was based on mutual respect, not on obligation or guilt. He had changed, really. He had matured. He had learned from his mistakes in a painful but deep way. Sometimes, when I saw him working on the farm, helping me with repairs without my asking, I saw flashes of the boy he once was, and I felt that perhaps complete forgiveness would arrive someday. But I was in no hurry. Forgiveness could not be forced. It had to be earned with time, with consistent actions, with proof of real change. My farm prospered more than ever. The community garden produced beautiful vegetables that we shared among all the women in the group. I had installed solar panels with part of the money I had saved over the years, and now my house was almost self-sufficient. I had also adopted 2 rescue dogs that kept me company and watched the property during the nights. I no longer felt vulnerable. I was no longer afraid someone would try to take what was mine because I had learned to defend myself. Because I had a support network. Because I knew my voice mattered. The afternoons on the porch were no longer lonely. Now they were full of laughter, conversations, women sharing their stories, their recipes, their dreams. We had created something beautiful from our pain, something that strengthened us all. One afternoon, while I was watering the flowers, I saw an unfamiliar car approaching up the road. My heart no longer jumped with fear like before. Now I just watched with quiet curiosity. A young woman got out of the car with a small child by the hand. She approached shyly and said to me, "Excuse me, are you Eleanor, the one from the article?" I nodded, and she continued with tears in her eyes. "My grandmother read your story a year ago, and thanks to that she had the courage to report my uncle who was trying to steal her house. We won the case. My grandmother recovered her property and now lives peacefully. I came to thank you personally because you saved my grandmother by having the courage to tell your story." I knelt in front of the child, smiled at him, and then hugged the woman, feeling that everything I had gone through, all the pain, all the struggle, had been worth it. That night, I sat on my porch as always, looking at the stars, listening to the crickets sing, feeling the cool breeze on my face, and I thought about the whole road traveled. I had lost my son temporarily. I had faced betrayal, manipulation, attempts at dispossession, but I had gained something much more valuable. I had gained my dignity, my strength, my voice. I had gained a community, a chosen family, a purpose bigger than myself. And I had learned the most important lesson of all, that sometimes the greatest show of self-love is to say no, to set limits, to defend what is yours, even if the whole world tells you that you must sacrifice yourself. Because sacrifice without limits is not love, it is self-destruction. And no mother, no person, deserves to destroy themselves to please others, not even their own children. Sometimes strength is born exactly when they try to snuff you out. And I had been reborn from the ashes, stronger, wiser, and more complete than ever.